They said the mirror revealed the truth. But when Elias Marlowe brought it home, it showed something else, faces of people who would soon die. Each reflection became a warning and then a curse. As the line between reality and reflection fades, Elias discovers that some mirrors don't just show your image, they decide your fate. This is beneath the skin of the mirror, where every face in the glass is a countdown and the final reflection may be his own. Elias Marlowe had always been drawn to things past their time, the weathered, the forgotten, the curious antiques that whispered stories of lives long gone. On a rain-soaked afternoon, he found himself wandering down a narrow, cobblestone street he had never noticed before, as if guided by some unseen force. There, tucked between a shuttered bakery and a faded bookstore, stood a small, unassuming shop with a faded sign that read simply, "Antiquities." The shop's window was a cluttered mosaic of old clocks, tarnished silverware, and, most prominently, mirrors of every shape and size. Their glass caught the weak daylight, fracturing it into shards of dim reflections that played tricks on the eyes. Elias felt a familiar pull, the quiet pulse of discovery stirring beneath his ribs. He pushed open the door, the bell overhead tinkling softly, and stepped inside. The air was thick with the scent of aged wood and dust, an aroma both comforting and unsettling. Rows upon rows of mirrors lined the walls, their frames carved with intricate patterns, twisting vines, snarling cherubs, and delicate filigree that seemed to writhe beneath the touch. Elias's footsteps echoed softly as he moved deeper into the shop. The light was dim, filtering through grimy windows and bouncing off countless reflective surfaces, creating an almost kaleidoscopic effect. He caught sight of the shopkeeper, only after a moment, a woman standing behind a cluttered counter, her dark eyes watching him with a steady, unreadable gaze. "Looking for anything in particular?" she asked, voice low and smooth like aged velvet. "Mirrors," Elias replied, "something unique." She nodded slowly as if she'd expected this answer. From beneath the counter, she produced a mirror unlike any other, a tall, ornate frame of burnished silver, curling into elaborate floral motifs that seemed to shimmer despite the dull light. The glass itself was flawless, reflecting Elias's figure with startling clarity. "This mirror," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper, "is said to reveal one's true self." Elias's fingers traced the delicate carvings, feeling a subtle warmth emanate from the frame. "How much for you?" she said. "A fair price. But be warned that which is reflected may not always be what you desire to see." He smiled faintly, brushing off the warning like a shadow at dusk. "I'll take it." The transaction was swift, and Elias left the shop clutching the mirror, its weight solid and strange in his hands. The streets outside were slick with rain, the sky a heavy gray canvas. Back in his cramped apartment, he set the mirror against the wall, adjusting the angle until the faint glow of the street lamp outside caught the glass. At first, the reflection was as expected, a pale, gaunt man with sharp features and deep-set eyes that betrayed restless nights and quiet obsessions. But then, the image shifted, and Elias blinked in disbelief. The face staring back was not his own. It was a stranger, a man with hollow, sunken eyes and a mouth drawn tight in a grimace that seemed to speak of unspeakable fear. The reflection was disturbingly real, like a window into another's nightmare. Elias reached out instinctively, fingertips brushing the cold glass. The stranger's eyes seemed to flicker, a subtle twitch of recognition, or was it a warning? The room grew colder, the silence pressing in like a living thing. Night deepened around him, the city's distant sounds muffled beneath the heavy cloak of darkness. Elias's mind raced, caught between fascination and a rising tide of dread. What was this mirror? What truth did it hold beneath its polished surface? He sat back, heart pounding, unable to tear his gaze away as the stranger's face flickered again, then faded into the blackness of the glass. Outside, the rain continued its steady patter against the window pane, as if the world itself held its breath. And somewhere, in the quiet depths of the night, the mirror waited. The night had settled over the city like a thick, suffocating shroud, the antique shop silent except for the soft ticking of an ancient clock mounted on the wall. Elias Marlowe sat hunched before the mirror he had acquired just days before, a piece so ornate it seemed almost alive, its gilded frame curling with strange, twisting motifs that whispered of forgotten sorcery. The air in the room was heavy, charged with a tension Elias could not explain, as if the mirror itself breathed beneath the surface. His eyes, dark and hollow from sleepless nights, were fixed on the glass. He expected to see his own reflection, the pale, gaunt face that had become a permanent fixture in the mirror's world. But tonight, the image shifted. The surface rippled like disturbed water, and the familiar visage dissolved into that of a man Elias knew. It was Thomas Larkin, a colleague from a few years past, a man whose smile had once been warm, but now seemed frozen in a grim mask of despair. Elias's heart quickened as he stared, his breath hitching. The reflection was not static. Thomas's eyes flickered with a strange intensity, as if pleading for some salvation Elias could not provide. The candlelight flickered beside him, casting grotesque shadows across the walls, and the mirror's surface shimmered once more. The room felt colder, as if the very essence of death had seeped in through the glass. Elias forced himself to look away, pressing his palms against the rough wood of the table. "This can't be," he muttered under his breath. "It's just a trick of the light." But the unease gnawing at his mind would not relent. The following morning, news arrived with a sharp sting. Thomas Larkin had been found dead under mysterious circumstances, the cause unexplained but sudden. The report was brief, clinical, but the impact on Elias was seismic. Sitting alone in his study, surrounded by relics and the faint smell of dust and old paper, Elias listened to the crackling radio broadcasting the news bulletin. Each word was a hammer blow to his nerves. The realization settled in like ice. The mirror did not reveal the true self. It revealed the next to die. Desperation clawed at him as he rifled through old photographs, news clippings, and his own hastily scribbled notes. He compared each face to the mirror's shifting surface, searching for a pattern, a way to break the cycle. The faces were always strangers, acquaintances, people he knew, people who vanished from the world with a suddenness that left no room for warning. But what could he do? How could he warn them? And would his warnings change anything, or merely hasten the inevitable? The mirror sat silently in the corner, its glass unnervingly still now, reflecting only the dim light of the room. Yet Elias knew better. Death lurked beneath that surface, waiting to claim its next victim. Night after night, he returned to the mirror, compelled by a force he could neither name nor resist. Each viewing deepened his dread, each reflection a step closer to a fate he could not escape. As he stared into the glass, the boundary between present and future, reflection and reality, began to fray. The mirror's secret was no longer a whisper, but a roar in his mind, a terrible truth he could neither accept nor deny. And somewhere in the shadows, the mirror waited, patient and unyielding, for the next face to appear beneath its skin. The night was heavy with a silence that pressed against the walls of Elias Marlowe's study, broken only by the soft tapping of rain against the window panes. He sat motionless, the ornate mirror leaning precariously against the far wall, its surface catching the dim glow of the solitary lamp. At first glance, it was a beautiful artifact, intricately carved wood, delicate etchings curling along the frame like twisting vines. But tonight the mirror was no mere decoration. It was a portal to a dread far deeper than any antique curiosity. Elias's eyes were fixed on the glass, where a face had appeared, one that was not his own. The pale visage of a man he recognized flickered there, as if trapped beneath the surface, frozen in a moment yet to come. There was something unsettling about the stillness, something unnatural in the way the reflection did not mimic his movements, but held a silent, ominous promise. He swallowed hard, the dry air in his throat thickening with fear. The face belonged to Jonathan Harker, an acquaintance had seen only a handful of times, a man whose life had seemed ordinary and unremarkable until now. Elias's mind raced, the weight of realization dawning like a cold shadow creeping up his spine. This was not a mirror showing the present self, but a grim oracle reflecting the next death. Unable to shake the mounting dread, Elias reached for the phone with trembling hands. The receiver felt heavy, foreign, as if the act of dialing might tether him irreversibly to the curse the mirror bore. He found Jonathan's number scrawled on a scrap of paper from a chance meeting months before, and hesitated only briefly before pressing the buttons. The phone rang once, twice. Elias's heart pounded so loud he feared it might betray him. When Jonathan finally answered, his voice was casual, unaware of the terror that gripped the other end. "Jonathan, it's Elias," he said, voice strained but urgent. "Listen, I need you to be careful. There's something terrible coming." A pause. Jonathan's tone shifted to cautious skepticism. "Elias, what are you talking about? You sound off. Maybe you should rest, please," Elias pressed, desperation lacing his words. "I saw something in the mirror, your reflection. It's not normal. I think you're in danger." Jonathan sighed, voice softening but still unsure. "Elias, I appreciate the concern, but I can't make sense of this. If something's wrong, I'll handle it. You should take care of yourself." The call ended before Elias could say more, the click of the receiver sounding like a final dismissal. He sat back, the cold dread settling deeper into his bones. He had tried to avert the inevitable, but the mirror's reflection was not to be ignored or altered so easily. Days passed in a haze of anxious waiting. Elias kept the mirror close, his nights spent watching the glass for any sign, any change. Then, the news came: the accident. Jonathan had died suddenly, the details grisly and inexplicable. The headlines on the brittle newspaper scraps confirmed the mirror's cruel prophecy with brutal clarity. Elias's hands trembled as he gathered the clippings, his mind a tumultuous storm of grief, guilt, and mounting paranoia. He began to record every detail, every face that appeared in the mirror, desperate to find some pattern, some loophole that might spare the next victim. His journal grew thick with notes and sketches, frantic scribbles that traced connections and timelines. Each entry was a step deeper into obsession, the line between reality and reflection blurring as the mirror's influence tightened its grip. One night, as the rain lashed against the windows and shadows stretched long and uneasy, Elias stood before the mirror once more. The glass shimmered with faces, some familiar, some strangers, but all etched with the silent mark of death. He reached out, fingertips brushing the cold surface, only to recoil as the reflection shifted into a dark, swirling mass beneath the glass. A chill ran through him as the sense of inevitability wrapped around his heart like a vise. Elias knew then that the mirror was not simply a passive observer but an active force, binding fate and fear in an unbreakable cycle. Yet, even as despair threatened to engulf him, a flicker of determination took root. If the mirror showed the future, perhaps understanding it could offer a sliver of hope, some way to break the chain before the next life was lost. But the cost of such knowledge was high, and the price still unknown. The mirror waited silently, its secrets buried beneath the gleaming surface, daring Elias to look deeper into the abyss that reflected not just faces, but the very essence of dread and mortality. The night stretched on, the city outside forgotten. As Elias stared into the glass, each reflection a whispered warning and a challenge. Somewhere beyond the thin veil of the mirror, fate watched and waited, unyielding and merciless. And Elias was caught beneath its skin, trapped in a nightmare from which there might be no awakening. Elias Marlowe hesitated outside the narrow doorway of the old townhouse that Mara Voss called her study. The street was quiet, the muted hum of distant traffic barely reaching this forgotten corner. He gripped the ornate mirror carefully, the weight of it almost tangible in his arms. The mirror's carved frame was intricate, filigreed with twisting vines and strange symbols that seemed to writhe beneath his touch. He had waited too long to seek help, the images haunting his nights growing ever more vivid and terrifying. Now was the time. He crossed the threshold, stepping into a dimly lit room lined with towering bookshelves sagging under the weight of ancient tomes and brittle manuscripts. The scent of old paper and melting wax filled the air, mingling with the faint aroma of herbs Mara often burned to keep the air clear. At a cluttered desk sat Mara Voss, her sharp eyes lifted from a leather-bound volume as he entered. Her short, dark hair framed a face that was both inquisitive and cautious, her practical clothing marking her more as a scholar than a mystic. "Elias," she said, voice steady yet warm. "I wasn't sure you'd come." He nodded, setting the mirror gently against a sturdy oak table. "I don't know who else to turn to. This thing isn't just a curiosity, it's something else entirely." Mara's gaze flicked to the mirror, the candlelight casting ghostly shadows that seemed to dance on its surface. "Show me." Elias hesitated, then lifted the mirror slightly, angling it so Mara could peer into its depths. The reflection shimmered, not revealing her image, but the face of an unknown man, pale, eyes wide with terror. Mara blinked, the scholar's skepticism momentarily shaken. "What is this?" she murmured. "It shows the face of the next person to die," Elias said quietly, voice taut with dread. "I've seen it happen. I saw a friend's reflection last night. He died this morning." Mara closed her eyes briefly, gathering her composure. "These mirrors, Elias," she began, "have a long and dark history. There are legends of cursed objects, death oracles that reveal not truths of the soul, but the inevitability of fate itself." For hours they pored over Mara's collection of texts, the flickering candlelight illuminating pages filled with archaic script and ominous illustrations. Elias's fingers traced the words as Mara translated passages describing mirrors bound by dark magic, objects that fed on fear and sealed destinies. The room seemed to close in around them, shadows deepening as the weight of the curse settled between them like a living thing. "There may be no way to undo what's been set in motion," Mara said, voice low but resolute. "But knowledge is power, Elias. If we understand the origin and mechanism of this curse, perhaps we can find a crack in its armor." Elias felt a flicker of hope, fragile as a candle flame in a storm. "I don't want to be a victim," he said. "I want to fight it." Mara nodded, her eyes reflecting the mirror's eerie glow. "Then we begin at the beginning." As Elias prepared to leave, clutching his notes and the mirror wrapped carefully in a cloth, Mara's gaze lingered on the object. A shadow flickered beneath its surface, a whisper of movement that made her heart tighten. She forced a smile. "Be careful, Elias. Some mirrors don't just reflect, they consume." Outside, the night air was cold and sharp, the city's distant sounds muffled by the weight of silence. Elias walked away, the mirror heavy in his hands, a symbol of dread and determination. Somewhere deep inside, a quiet voice wondered if this new alliance would be his salvation or the beginning of the end. The journey into darkness had only just begun, and the mirror waited patiently, its surface shimmering with the promise of secrets yet to be revealed. The study was awash in the heavy haze of twilight, the last slivers of daylight filtered through thick, dust-laden curtains, casting long, somber shadows across the cluttered room. Elias Marlowe sat rigidly in his high-backed chair, the ornate mirror resting on the desk before him like a silent sentinel. Its frame carved with grotesque, twisting vines and eerie faces frozen in mid-scream, seemed almost to breathe in the dim light, the lacquered wood glinting faintly. For hours, Elias had been captivated by the mirror's glass, his eyes searching the depths for any sign, any shift beyond mere reflection. The legend he had heard, the promise of a mirror revealing the true self, had twisted into something far darker. This was no ordinary glass. The faces it revealed were not his own but those of others, people whose lives were soon to be extinguished. And now something new stirred beneath the surface. As he leaned closer, a delicate ripple coursed across the mirror's face, like a soft sigh escaping from some hidden breath. The room seemed to freeze in time, the silence pressing against his ears until his own heartbeat roared like thunder in his chest. Then, faint and nearly imperceptible, a shape began to emerge beneath the glass, a shadowy figure, shifting and writhing just out of focus, as if trapped in some watery abyss. It was not a reflection nor a trick of light. It was something alive, something watching. Elias recoiled slightly but was drawn back by a force he could neither explain nor resist. His fingers trembled as they hovered over the mirror's surface, the air around him growing inexplicably cold. The shadow beneath the glass pulsed in time with his racing pulse, an unholy rhythm that seemed to mock his attempts to control it. He could feel its hunger, its thirst for fear, for the dread that now filled every corner of his mind. In the mirror's depths, faces flashed, some familiar, others unknown, each expression etched with terror and silent despair. One moment, an elderly woman with eyes wide in shock. The next, a child frozen mid-scream. Their images flickered and faded, replaced by the shadow's writhing form, a dark heart beating beneath the glass. The oppressive weight of inevitability pressed down on Elias's shoulders. He was no longer a mere observer. He was a prisoner of the mirror's will, dragged ever deeper into its nightmare. His breath came in short, ragged gasps as the line between reality and reflection blurred, the shadows creeping from the glass into the corners of the room, threatening to swallow him whole. Memories surfaced unbidden: his lost friend, the inexplicable death that had shattered his world, the relentless obsession that now consumed him. The mirror was a doorway, a threshold between worlds, and the shadow beneath was its sentinel, its curse made manifest. Elias knew now that the mirror did not merely reveal fate, it enforced it. Hours passed like minutes as Elias sat, trapped by the mirror's gaze. The shadow beneath the glass seemed to grow bolder, its shape becoming more distinct, yet no less terrifying, an amorphous silhouette with flickering eyes that burned like coals in the dark. It was a presence that fed on despair, drawing strength from the dread that twisted Elias's soul. Suddenly, the silence shattered. A low, guttural whisper seemed to emanate from the mirror itself, words incomprehensible, yet laden with menace curling through the air. Elias's skin prickled with cold sweat as he realized the mirror was speaking not in language, but in the raw essence of fear. He tried to look away, to break the spell, but his eyes were locked, his body rooted to the spot. The shadow reached out, tendrils of darkness stretching toward him, brushing against his reflection. In that moment, Elias glimpsed something terrifying, his own face, pale and drawn, eyes wide with horror, destined to become the next reflection within the cursed glass. With a gasp, he tore his gaze away, stumbling back from the desk. The room seemed to tilt, the shadows receding but never fully vanishing. Elias's breath was ragged, his mind racing with the knowledge that the mirror's curse was no longer a distant threat, it was a living nightmare closing in. Desperation clawed at him. He knew he had to understand this shadow, to uncover the truth beneath the glass before it was too late. But with every glance, every whispered secret from the mirror, the noose of fate tightened, dragging him closer to the abyss. And somewhere, deep beneath the surface of the glass, the shadow waited, patient and eternal. A dark promise that death's reflection was inevitable, and that beneath the skin of the mirror, nothing was ever truly safe. Elias did not yet know whether he would conquer the curse or be consumed by it. But one thing was certain: the mirror's shadow had claimed him, and the dread would only deepen from here. The mirror's glass shimmered faintly as the last light of day vanished, and the room was swallowed by darkness except for the faint, flickering outline of the shadow beneath the glass, watching, waiting, eternal.